How do you frame this discussion, and what would be your apprehension regarding this narrative that China is not doing enough to stop the genocide?
Well, um, on a fundamental level, I would say that all countries are not doing enough. We are facing a live stream genocide. Children are starving. People are being killed every single day. Journalists are being killed for telling the truth. Parents are being killed for trying to feed their children. Doctors are being killed for trying to save the wounded, and the entire area is in a kind of barbaric medieval siege designed to starve everybody to death, to wipe them out, and now there are further kinetic incursions. So clearly, this is a complete and total genocide. And under those situations, we can argue that nobody is doing enough because this is something that cannot and should not be tolerated. The question that we really have to think about is if we actually care about the Palestinians, what is the thing that is most effective? And we know that there are countries that are directly involved in funding the genocide. There are countries that are directly supplying weapons for the genocide. There are countries that are running cover for the genocide. There are countries that are rejecting any attempt in the UN, in the UNSC to sanction Israel. And we know that there are countries that are actually for whom Israel is the proxy. That literally, this is not here, it's a matter of analysis. If you think that this is an Israeli genocide, you are already off on the wrong track. It is a US genocide for which Israel is the subcontractor, and it has a kind of plausible deniability that the US is trying to, leverage. But this is actually a US imperial genocide. Just look at the history. As the rest of the world was decolonizing, a new colonial, settler colonial power was created in Palestine. Okay, this has to do with the larger imperial project uh, of colonization and control of resources in that area. If you think that this is a matter of Israel and Zionism specifically, you're already off on the wrong start. So if we understand that this is a US and Western imperial genocide, then we have to ask the harder question, which is how do we stop Western imperial genocide? And the answer to that is not easy because it has been a continuous stream of genocides. So then we have to ask, do we want to actually help the Palestinians, or are we trying to divert and diffuse blame? Are you trying to diffuse responsibility? We have to ask what is effective. And if we start to ask the question, what is effective, then we have to look at political responsibility. There are the settler colonial Western powers that are directly involved in the genocide. And those are the targets that you want to go after. If you start expanding the field and saying, third parties are responsible, everybody is responsible, then you've started to diffuse the blame and you've derailed the kind of concentrated effort that should be applied by the citizens of the global north uh, on their own governments to actually start to do something. We're starting to see large popular movements where people are trying to hold their governments to account. Every organization that I belong to in the United States is taking direct action against our own government. But there's a sector of the synthetic left that wants to divert and they want to say, look, this is so helpless. It's too big for us. We can't do anything. And then let's blame third parties. This is not political action. This is a kind of psychologizing and catharsis that people are trying to do. Some people are trying to do. It's this kind of disempowerment of necessary action. And it's a way, I believe, of hurting the Palestinians more than they're already hurting. If I wanted to divert responsibility, misdirect blame, and absolve the citizens of the West, and most of the people who are saying these are people who are citizens of the West. If I wanted to absolve myself from holding my own government accountable, this is the kind of argument that I would come up with. And then let's also frame it in the larger context that the US is looking for war against China. That's the link I recently sent you. US is actively escalating to war against China. And we know that this war is going to go nuclear. There's no way it cannot go nuclear. They're just looking for a casus belli at this point. And immediately as the war starts, it will go nuclear. And so then we're faced with literally a trolley problem, a nuclear trolley problem. It's not that the global south doesn't care, but they know who is holding the leash of the dog that is attacking them, that is attacking Palestine. And they have to find a way to disarm the owner rather than focus on the tail or on the attack dog. It's a misframing or a misunderstanding of what's going on to think that this is an Israeli issue and that all you need to do is, do some sanctions against Israel. That's not going to make the difference. You have to stop the weapons and you have to stop the political support and the political cover that the genocide enabling nations are doing. So I think it's a matter of trying to be effective and really caring about what the issue is rather than trying to, bolster whatever, sense of, trying to disown Western guilt. I think that is one of the key issues.
I want to come to the US preparation of war against China, but just for the context, since we discussed Palestine and we invoke the role that China has played, if we could also tell us a little bit about what China has actually done for Palestine, because China has brought together 14 different factions of the Palestinians' resistance movement in Beijing for a summit, and they have considered all of them as part of the resistance, as opposed to the United States, who calls many of them terrorists. Chinese companies like Costco and Okol have also diverged away from trading with Israel. And Chinese investment in Israel actually peaked in 2017, 2018. In the previous decade, China invested about 10 to 11 billion US dollar, but in the last decade, it has been just 2 to 3 billion US dollar. And trade has also peaked with Israel in 2023. A lot of our viewers are not necessarily aware of Chinese actions and what they are doing on a bilateral front. Of course, it's important to emphasize that China can't go over and above international structure and take unilateral approaches to sanctions and everything. So just to sum up this conversation, if you could also place in context what China is actually doing when it comes to its relationship with Israel and Palestine, that would be helpful, I guess.
Well, I think it's important to look at the original history. In 1988, China was one of the first countries to recognize the Palestinian state. And for decades before that, it was an ardent and powerful supporter of the PLO, including, supporting them directly in armed struggle. To this day, China has asserted that the Palestinians have the right to armed resistance. And as you point out, they brought together the 14 factions. of the Palestinian parties. you cannot you cannot do anything if the internal politics are fractured. So the first step is actually to bring the different parties together, which China has done. We also know that China has provided support to Iran. We know that Chinese companies have provided support to Yemen. In particular, they're using the Beidou targeting system. So these are not uh, uh, insignificant aid. And we also know that the reason why a lot of people started to understand what the Palestinians were really going through is because of TikTok, which is owned by the Chinese parent company. And this is why the Israelis are forcing TikTok, this is why the US is forcing TikTok to be sold because they see TikTok as a challenge to their control over the information sphere, but in particular over Taiwan. So I think there are multiple things that China is doing and has been doing and continues to do under different different things are being done. But let's look at also the issue of gutter. Just recently, Israel bombed the Palestinian leadership negotiating for peace in Qatar. Okay. And we know that the US greenlighted this because there's no way that Israel could have sent weapons platforms into Qatar, which is essentially a US base. It is, a monarchy that is masquerading as a country that is actually a pretext for the largest US base in the era. They are the two twin evil twins of the Middle East, Israel and Qatar. And they have a nice PR arm. It's called Al Jazeera. And they, lift up the Palestinian issues, but they always focus, as I point out, on the little I, Israel, not the big I, imperialism. And so when Israel bombs Qatar, uh, this is, you can see what the nature of how this setup is. And, what could China have done in that situation? Should it sanction Qatar? Should it sanction the United States? Should it sanction all the other countries that enabled the Israeli attack? These are complex issues. And so the Chinese are trying to navigate carefully in an entire minefield, which is actually being prepared for global war. In fact, I would say that we are already in the first steps of World War III. And as I said, this war is going to go nuclear. I would everything that I see in both doctrine and policy says that this is going to go nuclear. And of course, the current genocidaires are the two nuclear-powered rogue states, the United States and Israel. So we can see that there are tremendous stakes and risks involved. Just to kind of, once again, give the historical context. Genocide is nothing new to the Chinese people. During World War II, or from the Chinese standpoint, the Japanese fascist war of aggression against China, they lost 35 million people. That's 8 to 10% of their population. We saw, it started in 1931. And starting 1931, when they invaded Manchuria, they created a slave state called Manchukuo that was driven and run through slave labor. It was essentially millions of Chinese and Koreans held in slave labor camps and worked to death. And this is what built the Japanese industrial war machine that allowed them to, dominate all of Asia. But even then, why didn't the Chinese liberate all the Chinese held in concentration camps? In the Nanjing massacre, 300 Chinese held in a small city and bombed and slaughtered daily, very similar to what the Palestinians are going through right now. Why didn't the, PLA attack the Japanese? Why didn't they liberate their people? You know, these are people who don't understand the larger picture. It's like people who say, Ho Chi Minh was watching a woman being raped, one of his fellow countrymen being raped in front of his eyes in Saigon. And, you can say, why didn't Ho Chi Minh do anything? Well, he did. He did do something. He got rid of the rapists. These were the colonial policemen that were raping them. And he kicked them out of his entire country. But we have to understand that it's not simply about, we have to see the larger picture. It's not as simple as simply doing a frontal attack and hoping for the best. You have to understand there's a much, much larger and much, much bigger picture with even greater, believe it or not, even greater stakes than what we are seeing right now in Palestine. We can also see, during the Indonesian genocide, when 1 million, 1.5 million communists were killed, who were the first people killed during the Indonesian genocide? They were Chinese, right? It started out as a Chinese genocide. Okay. So China is not new to genocide, and it's not new to trying to resist this global hegemonic empire, which is genocidal in intent and practice. But the question is, how can you be effective? What is most effective? And that effectiveness falls back to the citizens of the global north to take actions against their own governments who are directly enabling, supplying the genocide. And then also, uh, being aware that we have to support the global south, which is trying to overthrow this genocidal empire. I think that's, I think, important to understand.
No, I agree. I mean, because people would contrast, for example, the present day China versus the Cold War, when Soviet Union have provided more logistic support and arms support. I'm even compared to present day China to say Mao era China, because Mao era China actually provided weapons and trainings for the Palestinian resistance groups. So China has been fairly consistent since for the last 40 years in its non-interference foreign policy. And this is so this way, yes, I mean I can see people are frustrated that China is not acting the same way as the Soviet Union was during the Cold War. But China's goal was never to upend the U.S. or world order. That's the idea that's in the Washington elite's mind, because China has been trying to work within the established international order. I'm talking about UN, ICC, ICJ, etc. And it's United States right now that's discarding these international institutions that itself has helped build after World War II, because U.S. increasingly felt constrained by these international institutions and conventions, and whereas China and Russia are trying to uphold the UN Charter, and this is why China would not, for example, send a peacekeeping force unless it's a UN authorized peace mission, right? And the China preferred channel of dealing with international conflict is through the UN, through the UN Security Council. And I completely understand why there's some criticism, particularly from the left, on why China didn't do more. But China's position has been quite consistent in terms of non-interference foreign policy, and China's what is China trying to achieve? You may ask. China is not trying to achieve global domination. China is trying to build up China. China is trying to build up a more prosperous society for its own citizens, and this is. But even that mere fact presents a challenge to the United States, because when China grows, that means when Chinese economy is set to surpass United States, well, according to the power purchase parity terms, it's already surpassed the United States. This is what makes people in Washington uncomfortable, because they're in their concept of the world, US should always remain number one. US should be always the top dog of the world. They cannot allow a near peer competitor to challenge the US position. The US need to have full spectrum dominance. And this is why they can't wrap their mind around the phenomena of rise or reemergence of China. And so they see a lot of the time when the West talk about China, it's pure projection. They are projecting onto China their own very own zero-sum mentality. They're accusing China of trying to be the global hegemon to replace United States. They're accusing China of being a new imperial power, of practicing neo-imperialism in the global South. Very ironic, coming from the West. But again, that's not what China is trying to do. China is just China is not trying to act as an empire. China is just it's just trying to act as a responsible nation state for the welfare of its own citizens.